My name is Rithwick. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys have probably mastered logic games, but I just wanted to show how I approach this section, considering the fact that I've seen a lot of people approach each question on the logics game separately and not kind of combine them. So one sec, let me send the link for the game I did, and it's gonna be questions 11 through 17. If you guys haven't taken a second, go ahead and read the question first and then get started on that. Okay, awesome. So the way I approach this is I like to pretty much, you can see my diagram is very long. For the most part, yours normally won't be like this because as you go through the more localized questions, so the if questions in that section, you'll starting to narrow down some of the more global questions, such as like question number 12 or question number 17. I only make one exception to this rule. I tend to answer the first question if it's generally about what is an acceptable like order for that game, just to give myself a little bit of a baseline to start off from. So what I normally do is you can look at my diagram. I put down the abbreviations of the destinations. So there's Guadalupe, Jamaica, Martinique, and Trinidad. And then right below that, I put the clues. And you can see for the first two clues, I put down diagram. So what that means is, so if you look at the first clue, Jamaica, it said that Jamaica will not be its destination in week 4. At the very top, I put a little annotation that says not J, just to give myself a reminder that throughout each of the questions, I should make sure that J is not on spot number 4. And then the second clue says Trinidad will be its destination in week 7. So I put a T in a box, and for the reason why I put a box is that spot cannot change at all. Like T for every question will be in spot 7. And then moving on to clue number 3, it talks about how Frida will make 2 voyages to Martinique, and at least 1 voyage to Guadalupe will occur in some week between those voyages. And I have diagrammed that as M G M, because we don't know exactly the spaces and how far or how many weeks between the M and the G's. So that's what the ellipses represent. Moving on to the next clue, clue number 4, they talk about how Guadalupe will be its destination in the week preceding any voyage it makes to Jamaica. So I put G before J, and I put it right before. And normally what I would do, even with some of these where you know for a fact G has to come before J, is I'll put a little box in front of it. But in this case, because of the fact that, and this is a special occasion, because of the fact that the letters can be used again, it's not a guarantee that the ordering will be like M dot, like you cannot combine clue number 3 and clue number 4 because they could be 2 different trips, if that makes any sense. And so moving on to the last clue, which talks about no destination will be scheduled for consecutive weeks. I just put that at the very bottom, and I'll put like a cross and a circle around it with each of the destinations, just to give myself a reminder for that. Thank you, Alyssa. And then that's kind of where I start, is to first create those diagrams for this clue so I have an idea of where to start. And then I move on to something called, I move on to just pretty much something called deductions, where I just start seeing if any of the clues will tell me where some of the letters or some of the destinations can be and where some of the destinations cannot be. So in this case, on spot number 6, I put that Trinidad cannot be visited that week because of the fact that it says in clue number 5 that you can't have 2 consecutive weeks of the same destination. And then some people might get tricked up in thinking that they can put G in front of, or saying not G in front of spot number 4 because of clue number 4 over here. However, because of the fact that it does state in the game that it's at least once, that there is a possibility that Guadalupe could be visited twice, I did not include that. Does anyone have questions so far on this setup?
Well, just to start off with, I think this is fantastic. It's a very clean, neat presentation. I think your walkthrough of the rules was very easy to follow and pretty concise. So I like that a lot. I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the benefits as you see it of laying out the diagrams in this particular way and what I would call more of a grid style, perhaps. Because I know a lot of folks, myself included, do it differently, where we'll do like individual separated diagrams for each individual question. It seems like you've kind of combined them all into one big chart.
So yeah, that's what I was just about to get.
Then go right ahead.
Explaining that. Yeah. Was that here, let me just go through it and I'll be like a couple steps in. So the way I approach this is just like most people do, is we focus on the questions with the ifs in them, so more of the localized questions. And the reason why I do that is, as you can see for most of the questions, they're not necessarily in order. You can see on the left, it says 11, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then 12 and 17. And the reason why I do that is because of the fact that with the more localized questions, that's kind of where you have to start diagramming and start like kind of listing out the destinations and seeing which ones work and which ones don't work. And I do that according to the answer choices. So for something like question number 13, I'll include in the first line, so if Frida makes a voyage to Trinidad in week number 5, which of the following could be true? So what I do is I put a little box, I put a box normally around spot number 5, just to make myself, like, make a little reminder for myself that T has to be there for question number 13 for sure. So as I keep redrawing or rewriting the order to see which one works best, I know for a fact that T has to be there besides including the other previous steps. So like spot number 7 has to be T, and then there's a sign saying that, oh, there's no J. It's kind of tiny, but it says over here that there's no J in spot number 4. And then I also made the distinction that there's going to be no J in spot number 6 because T will come before J, and it specifically says in the clues that Guadalupe is the only one that can come before Jamaica. So I make that as a little note. With any question, you're going to see, like, the way I approach is I try to make sure I can write out some of those deductions beforehand so I don't have to realize that later. And it makes it easier so that, like, there is no possibility of making a mistake of not including those deductions and not looking at the clues when answering some of these more localized questions. And so what I do is I go through and I start, especially with the which of the following could be true, I try to find ways to make it not be true. So with 13A, if I was to make a voyage to Trinidad in week number 1, I would make an order in such a way where Trinidad could not be week number 1, and it makes it invalid. And I'll keep going through that process for the next couple of questions until I find one that works. And as you can see on the right, I kind of just put a little X a couple of times until I found the right answer, which was the last order. And to answer Evan's question, I normally do the questions that have the if force because of the fact that with those, you start having to rewrite the order in different ways and other possible ways. And by doing that, when you get to questions like 17, which of the following must be true about Freedom's schedule of voyages, you'll see a pattern as you're going down of which destination was the same, going all the way down, and which destinations did not work. It works for most of the time, and it makes it a lot easier to answer some of the other questions. So by doing the work in the if questions, it kind of speeds up the process for the remaining questions that are more global, like number 17 and number 12, where it says which of the following cannot be true about Freedom's schedule of voyages. just going through, you can see like that in some cases, like J can't work in a certain spot, or G won't work in a certain spot, or M won't work in a certain spot, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how you're able to determine, okay, cool, like this one doesn't work because it didn't work in this instance, or this one doesn't work because it didn't work in that instance. If that makes sense. Exactly. That's kind of the whole point of me going through those if questions first, is to allow me to diagram and then see if there are any possibilities or any answers that can help me answer some of the other questions. And that's why I do those other questions at the end. Hence why 12 and 17 are at the bottom. With this one for like number 12, you didn't really have to use this type of diagram because of the fact that Trinidad for sure could not be in week 6, and you could have just done that based off of the clues, because as it said in clue number 5, that Trinidad could not be like no two destinations could be consecutive. So if Trinidad was already in stop number 7, there's no way it could be in week number 6. So in some cases it doesn't, but for the most part I try to use the strategy just because it helps for the most part. And each section is always going to be different. There's always going to be something that's useful and something that's not. Here, let me see what Alyssa just said. Yeah, I mean, it's not always going to work for every situation, but I tend to try to do those if questions, and that's also why I do the first question, talking about an acceptable schedule of destinations, because normally based off the clues, for most part, those questions are some of the like easier ones to answer because you can just plug in the clues and see which clue doesn't work and which one doesn't, and it gets you accumulated with the clues to kind of warm yourself up. So when you get to more of these localized questions, you kind of have an idea of, okay, what doesn't work, what deductions can I apply, which deductions I cannot apply. And even for those cases where there are not as many local questions, even just having one order to kind of give you an idea of what's a possibility can eliminate some of the answer choices for some of those other global questions. Yeah, that's about it. Does anyone have any questions? Does anyone want me to go through these diagrams? I know it's a lot, and I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time. So
I think this is really cool, Rithvik. I appreciate your sharing your diagrams and your process. I think we've given folks the tools where if they want to take this, and I have a can I share with them that PDF that I made?
yeah, go ahead.
All right, cool. So I basically made a PDF earlier of Rithvik's diagram for those who might want to save a copy of that work to maybe do this game in full later and then compare it against what you've done, Rithvik, just to see it, some different ways that one might lay it out. I think what was really cool, aside from just your sharing your process, was your style in laying it out, because it's different than how I do that. And I celebrate that because I think there's multiple different ways to go about it. And to some extent, things like that are personal, what works for you versus what works for somebody else. And so I think there are benefits to each approach, but I like as well that you talked about the order in which you approach the questions, because I also often recommend doing the local ones before the global ones to build up that baseline of hypothetical scenarios. And as Alyssa pointed out, if there's a game with a majority global questions, then that can be kind of intimidating to think, oh, well, am I going to get all the answers just from my few local diagrams? And the majority of them are kind of open-ended, in which case maybe there are more upfront inferences to do, or maybe there's a bit more creativity involved. Some tougher games may not have as much in the way of leading you down a certain path, and you may just need to look at what they've given you at the start. But in this particular game, since there was only, I think, one global question, it was possible to solve it using the previous work. But as you said, if you see it, it's also possible to do it just based on the initial ideas. Okay, well, if T's on 7, can't be on 6. It can be that easy sometimes.
Yeah, and then one more thing to add. I know the diagrams look like a lot, but I just feel like doing that for the first couple of games, as Steve's mentioned multiple times, just kind of practicing it over and over, you'll slowly start realizing, oh, okay, some of this stuff is repetitive. I can take that out and shorten these diagrams. The intention of me just making them super long is so that you could see like, oh, okay, like for some of the globalized questions where some of the answer choices won't work. So like if 12 did not include something like 12A, where the answer was kind of given in the clues and it was something else that you need to look through your diagrams or make additional good diagrams to to figure out that question, you can look through your previous diagrams you made for the localized ones and kind of pinpoint where exactly that question could not work or why that answer is correct or not.
Very cool. Can you share a little more about how long you've been doing games for in general? Like how many months, how many hours have you put in? Just to share with folks a little bit more who might be earlier in the process. I'm wondering how long it might take them to get to this point.
Yeah, so I'm assuming for many people this is the same case, but logic games are kind of my like favorite part of this section. And so when I started prepping back in July, this is kind of the one thing I was focusing on the most. That's kind of why I've mastered this technique, and now it's kind of like figure out the rest of the sections. But yeah, it's been about now, what, it's November, so I would say like 4.5 months since I've started working on this, and I didn't really adapt this technique until like August, mid-August. So
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Rithvik. It's good to hear a little bit about your journey.